Hi, shalom, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Crossing Boundaries, our live stream. Together with me is Aziza Bussera, one of our fantastic co-founders at Touchless, and I'm Kim Passiosef, the Director of Operations, streaming to you live from Tel Aviv, Israel. And I don't know who's sharing their screen, but we can see everything you're doing right now. So thanks. Aziz, so we started a little bit talking about what future travel is going to look like, and that's what our panelists are going to be discussing, each on a very, very, very different topic, actually, or field. So let's get started with you, Jared. You're coming from the hotel field, and can you tell us a bit about Legacy Resorts? What's unique about the chain?
Yes. So Legacy Vacation Resorts has 8 resorts, and we're in the states of Colorado, Florida, Nevada, and New Jersey. And we have a mix of different types of vacation experiences. A lot of them are nature-based, which is nice at a time like this. But we also have ones that are in theme park destinations like Orlando, Florida, and in gaming destinations like Reno, Nevada.
Awesome. And you are part of something called the B Corp, which Mejdi is also part of, and you also do the, you are very focused on social aspect of not just travel, social aspect in business. Can you tell us about those kind of organizations and what they are?
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up, because that's probably what I'm most proud of about being in the resort business. It's a unique way that we operate, that we're getting more and more B Corps in the travel space, but there's not enough yet. And what makes B Corps unique is, I like to call it more of like a trust mark. It's a credibility mark that certain companies have because of the level of transparency we have in how we operate. And B Corps achieve the highest levels of social and environmental responsibility. So we see to it that, yes, we can be profitable, but we have to be doing good at the same time. And if we're not, that's not good enough for us. So we go through a rigorous certification process to prove that we do what we say, that don't just trust us, but we're going to be transparent with you. And we adopt this kind of stakeholder orientation, which means that we care equally about our community and our employees and our environment, our customers, our supply chain, and we have to do well in all of those areas. And if we can be profitable and do well, it's a good business model. So we're not allowed to travel.
The amazing part, you can actually log on to B Corp and see each company there, how they're doing in each one of those, and you can know how we each trying to get better in each one of these lines. And I know some companies who've taken them years to be able to be approved to be part of the B Corp, which is kind of a different system than just, oh, I donate 1% or 5% or whatever of my income as a company, and it doesn't matter how I treat my staff, it doesn't matter what I think about the environment, it doesn't matter any of those things. I only can do one. And what's unique about B Corp, I think, is that it's doing all of these. So it's kind of incredible. But let's go into our topic, which is you run all these hotels and resorts, and this is a time that's not easy for the travel, obviously, travel industry. But hotels still do get bookings, at least some hotels are, in the US for sure. How do you do that? How do you get people safely into your hotels? Is there a way to be safe in this time of COVID?
There is. We need to be careful, and we're constantly improving what we do to maintain safety levels. But people still want to travel. They just want to know that it's safe to travel. And some destinations are safer than others, and some types of travel are safer than others. So we've worked very hard on ensuring that what we are promoting is in fact safe. And we've done that through a variety of safety measures that we've introduced that we didn't have previously, regarding cleaning, regarding touchless features. I can go through a list of some of that if you'd like. but also really focusing on the types of resorts that are the safest. Some of those being resorts with fewer people. You know, that you hear about large groups of people. That's really not where you want to be right now. You want to be at smaller resorts. So the majority of our resorts are between 40 to 100 rooms. That's small on the resort front. So you can easily social distance, and you don't have to be in large groups. And if you go use the pool or go use an amenity, you're not going to be shoulder to shoulder with someone. You know, we have a lot of good signage in our lobbies and stickers on the ground so that people can kind of remember what 6 feet distance looks like. And we also have a lot of these resorts that are around nature, as you can see in some of these pictures. So our resorts in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, people go out there to be in the mountains. And anyone who's been in the mountains knows you kind of have them to yourselves. You have them even more to yourselves these days. Our resorts on the beaches have been getting a little bit busier than they once were, but you still can distance on the beaches. You still can take in, you know, the ocean air and the salt water, and those have been very popular. And we've been surprised in the month of July, our nature-based resorts were actually busier this year than they were last year. And that's okay, because we have, you know, people can safely vacation there. On the other hand, our resorts where we have theme parks and we have a lot of people like city centers, they've been slow. And that's, again, that is also okay because it's harder to distance in those locations. So we'll see how all this continues to play out, but I think that nature-based resorts are going to continue to be popular for the foreseeable future. And I think the other ones will slowly pick back up as safety procedures are followed and as we work our way through, you know, this crisis.
And is there, I'll let you, Kim, maybe ask, but I have one quick question. Is there any changes and procedures that you are doing as a hotel to, like, I'm assuming disinfecting surfaces and so on? How does that work, and how does it affect your whole overall structure, even as a business? And then how do you get people to trust that things are, like, I know I've done small travels that, you know, drive distance and had to stay in a hotel. And I remember walking into the hotel terrified. And I asked for a room to be on the first floor, to have a hotel room if possible, not too close to other people. I was asking maybe even too much. I was scaring the people there, but I think others were probably doing the same. And how do you assure people? And then what kind of procedures exactly does the hotel take?
It's a good question.
I want to add to Aziz's question. It's funny because in Israel, just I think a couple months before COVID-19 hit, there was a huge thing on the news showing that hotels don't actually change the the bedding and the towels. And I'm thinking, you know, if this happened before COVID, then what are people expecting now when you're short on staff and, you know, all of these things are even a bit more scarier?
It is scary because even hotels that have policies, you want to know that they're enforcing those. So I would say where we started, because as this hit unexpectedly for, you know, for all of us, and at the outset, we started to say, put ourselves in our guest shoes and say, how does the journey as a guest begin? So from the very beginning of the booking process, I feel like I want to go on vacation. How does it all play? Excuse me. How does it all play forward from there? From I'm booking my trip to then I'm going to fly or drive to get to my destination, to I'm going to go through the check-in process at the front desk, to I'm going to go to my room and turn on the light switch. And then from there, I'm going to go enjoy some facilities on site, maybe food and beverage, maybe a pool. Then I'm going to go do some attractions and entertainment in town. And we tried to look at that whole flow, and you try to look at every touch point along the way and every opportunity where there could be risk or perceived risk even is important. Whether or not there's real risk, how do we address that? So right from the outset, we knew we would need to make as many features touchless as possible. So if they weren't touchless already, we were going to start introducing those. So we contacted our technology provider, and we've been working on a complete touchless check-in process. And we have a version of it that we've been using right now, but our full-blown live one will kick in right after Labor Day, because it takes a while with technology to roll these things out. But after Labor Day, you will book your stay on our website, and a week or so before you come out, you'll receive a text or an email from us saying we're looking forward to having you stay with us. Please fill out these basic details, and then when you come in, you can basically just pick up a key at the front desk. At some properties, eventually, we'd like you to be able to do that with your smartphone, but at the outset, you're just going to pick a key up at the front desk. Those keys are sanitized between each guest, and we ensure that when they're handed out, that they haven't been used, and we have labeling all through that process. So even if you use pens on site, we have sanitized pens and ones that need to be sanitized. When you do show up on site and you come into our lobby, we have signage all over the place that we didn't previously. Letting people know what social distancing looks like. We have stickers on the floors in our lobbies to keep 6 feet of social distancing. We ensure not too many people are in the lobby at any given time, and people can be waiting in their car and be contacted to come in, or they can wait outside, depending on the location. We have sneeze guards at our front desk, so when you're talking to staff, there is a barrier. On top of that, staff also do wear face masks, but we have both of those in place. Some are glass, some are plexiglass. And then guests can return to the lobby if they need to, or from there, they'll go to their rooms. And so we've implemented cleaning procedures at all of our properties that where you identify all the high touch areas. So high touch areas would be things like light switches. They're kind of turned on and off regularly. Phones in hotels used to be, people tend to use their cell phones now more than that, but remote controls are like a high touch area. And so any areas like that receive additional cleanings than they used to. They are all cleaned in between, check in and check out, but even throughout the stay when guests are there. So we've looked at each of those areas, and if you go on our website, we have a graphic of our room that describes what we're cleaning and how frequently we're cleaning it. When it comes to kind of public spaces, the clubhouse, the lobbies, we've removed some amenities that would be nice to have, but if it involves congregating and a lot of touching, such as maybe some shared coffee machines or shared areas that previously were popular, we have removed those. We would like to reintroduce those at some point when we can do so safely. And it's a continued process. We've taken guest feedback along the way. So if we learn that there's something new we need to address, we do. And as new technology comes out, we're continuing to improve the process. So I guess I could talk about this a lot more, but generally speaking, we've given a lot of thought to it. We continue to learn from the best in the industry. So we look at what the industry organizations are doing, and we try to adopt their standards or go beyond that. And maybe the last point to touch on, because I think you'd asked too, like, where's the trust level of all of this? Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons we love being a B Corp, because when people learn what a B Corp is, and they realize how hard it is to become one, and that really, if you are one, that's probably the highest level of trust and credibility you can have as a business. We say, look, I'm telling you about those safety and cleaning policies, and we're a B Corp. That's about as close to a trust level as I think you can get with an organization.
Right, and I wanted to say, as fellow B Corps, I'm really happy to connect and partner with you. And hear all of this. It just makes me feel a bit more relaxed when thinking of traveling to one of your resorts. And by the way, I'll just say that we just put up a web page also with your resorts, and MedC is offering some perks. So feel free to check it out. We can send on the chat soon the link itself. And the last question I wanted to ask you, Jared, was, do you think that any of these safety precautions are going to stay with us? Are there things that are developing that you're saying, oh, wow, this is something we should have thought about years ago?
So like the touchless technology, I've always wanted to do the touchless technology, to have it in place, because that's part of, I think, as a younger generation appreciates having their smartphone control everything. And we've been concerned because we have different generations that we appeal to, and we were concerned we'd have pushback from other generations. So I do think it's going to help us push some of the newer technologies on board. So that definitely will stay. I think the part of it that I'm very hopeful we can soon bring back is hospitality is all about service and personal connection. And so, not saying what's great now is we're not wearing masks and we can see each other's smiles and the warmth that we convey. That is such an important part of the hospitality experience. So we need to find ways to reintroduce that under the newer cleanliness standards and protection standards. And as we do that, I think people will feel the excitement and enjoyment of travel similar to like it once was.
Awesome. I have a question for Kim. And thank you, Jared. This was really, really great. And especially for people who are rethinking, do I want to go to a hotel or not? How do I choose? I think what you outlined is making sure you know what the practices and policies of these hotels. I know, Kim, you actually have stayed in a hotel since the pandemic. I know you did, last week? And have you seen these things? Were these concerns for you? Did you ask about them when you did?
Yeah, well, we went to a hotel that is run by a friend, so I was a bit calmer. But for example, breakfast was not served regularly. We had to go to the dining area, and there were like these large tables. And my dad came up, he's so used to it. He just came up to take something, and like 3 people jumped at it saying, "No, don't touch it. We have gloves and we have masks, and we're going to create a box for you that you can take back to your room." So it was really nice to see. And I think that the nice thing in Israel in some places, and I'm sure that it's similar to other places in the world, is that when you go to like a kibbutz or, a hotel it's like these apartments. So you're completely spaced off from anyone else, and it's not the same feeling of being kind of crunched together. So it's also good to hear, Jared, that you're finding ways to create this separation, that hopefully that's one of the elements that won't stay after COVID.
Right. And Kim, you got another question here asking about
Sure.
air travel from US to Israel and Europe. Well, I know at least definitely the Israel part. Is air travel happening right now?
Not so much. Mainly Israelis are allowed in, or people with dual citizenship, coming in from various countries. And depending on the country, they're telling you how much you need to quarantine. Hearing from friends that did travel, a lot of people I know in the US kind of packed their things and came back home once COVID hit. So they were saying that most of the flights are really empty. They keep reassuring you that the air conditioner is coming out, it's cycling out of the plane, so you should feel calmer. But actually, Israel just opened its skies to a few countries, Croatia, Greece, I think Turkey, and we're starting to see people at the airport, which is it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when all of these tourists come back. How are they going to affect these countries? How are they going to affect us? But at the moment, not many tourists are coming in.
Right. Thank you. Well, it's time to move to our next person we are interviewing. And again, thank you, Jared. This was incredible.
Thank you.
We are interviewing Wes. And Wes, you are with the Legacy Fund, and you have your hands in many things as well, as we know. I met Wes a couple of years ago in Patagonia. I know, Shannon, if you got the photos I sent you or not. If not, it's fine. But ended up meeting with Wes, doing speaking and training to a group of tour guides, and you did some of that work as well. And it was just an amazing to be in Puerto Natales together. You can see Wes here to the right of the photo where I'm speaking. No masks, totally irresponsible. And these are my photos from Patagonia and from the national park you work in. It's one of the most beautiful nature-wise places I have ever absolutely seen. And we wanted to have you with us because a lot of, when we talk about travel, and how travel is going to work through COVID and then after, I think we need to talk also about these natures. And I see a lot of interest that people have in nature more than before. Suddenly everyone, like the county park next to my home, is suddenly everyone is going on walks there. That didn't happen. That park had nobody visiting it for like the last 3 years probably. And suddenly there's an interest in those parks. But before we go into that, can you tell us a little bit about you and about your work?
Certainly. Well, first of all, thank you all for having me. It's really great to be a part of a panel and talking about tourism when we can resume traveling a little bit more, and sort of talking about how to do that responsibly and in the best way possible. Yeah, I actually I have kind of a little deck here that I'm going to share just to talk about our work. So can I just, can you all see this right here?
We can.
Okay, great. So, so I'm the director for the Torres del Paine Legacy Fund. We are a nonprofit program of the Center for Responsible Travel, CREST. Previously, we were a nonprofit program of Sustainable Travel International. So they're our fiscal sponsors, and we work in about as far south as you can get in Chile. We're closer to Antarctica than we are to Santiago, which is the capital of Chile. So we're at the ends of the earth. And so nature tourism is something that sort of is our main focus, right? And what we do is we act as destination stewards, sort of working to ensure a more sustainable future for Torres del Paine National Park and its surrounding communities. And so then the question begs, why do we exist? So about 5 years ago, the founder of Legacy Fund, Drew Fink, was down in the region just traveling, and he sort of realized there was no mechanism there to fill all of these gaps that are normally filled by, in the United States, a combination of sort of the U.S. Forest Service and a lot of the businesses that work locally, different nonprofits. And there was no mechanism at all sort of to mobilize resources and also build a culture of what we call destination stewardship. So destination stewardship is the idea that everybody that's sort of involved in the tourism value chain, everybody from local tourism businesses to international operators to protected areas and their authorities, sort of all play a hand in making sure that tourism there continues to exist in the most sustainable way possible. So we exist because when Drew was there, and sort of as the organization has grown, we've realized that conservation efforts and resources for Torres del Paine National Park and other protected areas in the region really do not equal the high tourism demand and sort of the exponential growth in visitation that this area has experienced, especially over the last 5 years. This obviously, because of a lack of infrastructure to support this tourism boom, has negatively impacted some of the ecosystem. So a lot of people think, oh, well, you know, nature tourism is great, I'm gonna go on a hike. But you going on a hike, just like you know, staying at a hotel, just like you taking an airplane, they all have impacts on the ecosystems. And so we have down here CONAF, who is sort of the Forest Park Authority equivalent in Chile, and we directly partner with them. And through our working agreement with them, we're essentially able to help mobilize resources for different sustainability priority projects in Torres del Paine National Park and other protected areas in the region. You can see it's just an expansive national park. That little thing right there is me, but it's an incredible national park. It really is considered one of the 8 wonders of the world. But as you can see, sort of since about 2012, 2013, tourism has just been exponentially growing. And sort of with this growth, in tourism, resources have kind of gone the opposite direction. And so it's really tough to sort of focus on sustainability in an area when resources for the national park, which has an entrance fee, all of those resources sort of are divided evenly at the federal level. So you have a national park that has, you know, 10,000 visitors a year, and then Torres del Paine that receives nearly 300,000 visitors a year, and they're receiving the exact same resources. And obviously that's not a super sustainable way to operate. So what are our objectives and how do we operate in all of that? So we work to preserve the national park's ecosystems, think reforestation, different projects related to ensuring that invasive species sort of don't overrun the national park. We also work to improve the infrastructure and mitigate visitor impacts. We really focus on a lot of sustainable trail work, on building different types of national park infrastructures from boardwalks and bridges to eco toilets to ensure that visitor impacts sort of are minimized as much as possible. We also work in surrounding communities and try and involve the local community as much as we can in this tourism boom. And we work to diversify sort of the recreation and tourism offer in Patagonia, so it's not just all focused on one national park. I put this picture of volunteers here, and the reason I did is because everything we do is with Chilean volunteers in the national park. So sort of our model is that we take these applications from all over Chile. They, yeah, go ahead.
The volunteers, Wes, I have actually a question specifically.
Sure.
Because as we talk about the future of travel, one of the projects you are working on, we talking about doing together, is bringing more volunteers, and that's something really important because that's not happening. And we talk about volunteers not just of locals but also of tourists coming together,
sure,
starting to work together as volunteers, where you're going to come and enjoy this unbelievably beautiful place. And I think part of you will feel, I want to do something. I know that's how I felt when I was there. What can I do to make this place more sustainable, that other people will come and enjoy this place? What do we do to conserve it? I was never a big conservation person, I'll admit it. It's a more recent thing for me, and it is a thing I now care about because I got to see I came with you, and you got to show me the beauty of just unbelievable beauty down there, and went to places like Belize and went to places like Vietnam, and realize we need to do something to preserve it. And tourists don't usually get that message. So can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess to talk about our volunteer model, what we do, because Torres del Paine is so expensive, we sort of provide the opportunity for Chileans to come to Torres del Paine. We give priority to people from the region. Come volunteer in the park with us for 10 days outside of your trip sort of to Puerto Natales, where we're based out of. We cover all your expenses sort of from then on, once you're in the national park, so you don't have that burden of having, pay thousands and thousands of dollars to come visit this wonderful place. But sort of what you're talking about when it comes to international tourism, one thing we're kind of shifting to and focusing our efforts on in the coming years is actually giving tourists the opportunity to do something in the park for a day or two while they're on their vacation, right? So we'll partner with local operators and say, look, this is great, you guys can go do a 4 or 5 day trek, but after you do that 4 or 5 day trek, why don't you come spend 2 days camping with us? We'll do some citizen science together, and we'll collect data that's important for improving reforestation efforts in the region. And so that really provides a way to sort of, provide more opportunities to Chileans and locals that want to volunteer with us and have the resources to do so on our end. But then simultaneously, for some of these Western tourists that are coming in and visiting the area, and international tourists, provide them with a way to give back in a sustainable way that's not just symbolic. And so it's really sort of, and what I was thinking about a minute ago is how Jared was talking about nature-based tourism. And I really think this is sort of the future of nature-based tourism, where it's not just tourism, right? But where along your incredible trip, where you're hiking, trekking, kayaking, doing whatever, you can also spend a day or two building trail, or helping to remove some invasive species from the park, whatever it is. So, and one way that we kind of have already sort of built the foundation to do this is with our local and international partners, right? And so some of them will come in, as you see here on the right, where we're doing a chat about reforestation, and then we end up sort of looking at the importance of that. We'll have them move some dirt around and get their hands dirty for a little bit. And then some businesses that don't go into the field with us will come up with little promotions so that they can financially support legacy funds, so we can support the rest of our volunteers, right? So here's a bar that gives us 500 pesos for beer that they sell throughout the year, right? And then I just kind of wanted to share like some photos from the field with everybody, just so you can kind of see the sweat equity that all of our volunteers put into trail building. We built this boardwalk. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a short question, Wes, that we have from our listeners about the volunteers. Do you also look at them as future leaders? Do you want them to, continue the process with you, or is it really just going down to those 10 days?
No, absolutely. I think the idea is that we see this as an environmental exchange. I don't want to just say education, because we learn from them just as much as they learn from us. We'll have microbiologists join us that know way more than me sort of about the different flora and fauna in the park, right? And a lot of the ecological processes. But yes, the idea is that they can take back to wherever they live in Chile and say, hey, we can do something great with the protected areas here. We can build some sort of destination stewardship mechanism or organization or volunteer program to sort of give back, and the protected areas closer to home. And yeah, that's kind of my deck right there. I just kind of wanted y'all to see those photos.
Very awesome photos, just like the one behind you. I'm thinking about, and I wonder if it's already happening in Chile. I know it will definitely happen. Like I said, a lot of people now getting more interested in nature. And as people are not able to travel international as much, we can see more people traveling local. Is this happening in Chile and in probably Argentina with Patagonia, where people are coming to that escape instead of going to other places? Do you expect maybe, how is COVID gonna affect that kind of tourism, and is it gonna increase the number of locals traveling there?
Yeah, it's gonna be tough. So I think first of all, the borders between Chile and Argentina remain closed. So there's no really international travel happening, and domestic tourism, and even just traveling between regions and cities is still really complicated in Chile right now. They're working on opening up the national park in September, October, but you know, I don't want to act like I have a ton of information regarding sort of the health outcomes of this, but they are working on sort of a slow reopening that's promoted to domestic tourists, people from the region that can then go and visit the national park, and then eventually national tourists that can fly down and visit, and hopefully international tourists later on in the season, right? One thing that you mentioned sort of about nature tourism growing, I think on sort of to add on to that, it's not just that people want to get outside, but as people start to get outside, one thing that's really interesting to me is they're starting to realize the impacts that people have had on the outdoors, right? So sort of at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was like, carbon emissions are down, and sort of there's this collective conscientiousness that grew around carbon emissions, and now people sort of are getting more into hiking, as they get into like these outdoor activities, doing little things to make trails better, doing little things to sort of appreciate what they're seeing outside, will also start to grow. So I think just in terms of responsible nature-based tourism, you know, I think there's a lot of things that we're going to be able to take away from COVID and sort of put into programming sort of between operators, local nonprofits like us, and sort of everybody else involved in the tourism value chain.
You ran through the slide about your projects. Do you want to tell us about any of them specifically, or
sure,
your favorites?
Yeah, sure. I can run back right quick and give a couple of
and I'll just say, if anyone has questions for Wes, then this is a good time.
Yeah, so I mean, just to sort of like describe how difficult a project like this was to build a boardwalk, you can see that this is in a wetland area that didn't have this infrastructure there before. It was just being sort of trampled over by tourists, and that obviously has really intense ecological effects. And the reason that this is so challenging is this is 20 miles away from any road. So just to get the lumber back there, the lumber had to be transported over 17 times by helicopter just to get there. We had to work together with the national park to get it there. Volunteers have to go, and we just basically sleep in tents and are really roughing it for 10 days just to get this stuff done. We're in an isolated part of the world, and so when we source our lumber, we source it from locals, but a lot of times, because we're in Patagonia, just getting the right screws that we need, whatever it may be, becomes a challenge. So just something like this in a protected area is a really big lift, but also sort of speaks volumes to what we've been able to collectively do with our partners. And you can see there, we're sort of working on some trail. We built a new 10-kilometer trail between two of the major campgrounds in the park. This is also some of the reforestation monitoring that we do. And so if we start talking about tourism's effects on nature, I actually think this is really important to highlight. So reforestation is important in Torres del Paine National Park because there have been 3 forest fires that have burned about a fifth of this 242,000 hectare national park All three of them were started by tourists. One, a tourist put his cigarette butt out on a tree trunk, and that's breaking national park rules, burned 15,000 hectares. Another one was using a camp stove in an unauthorized area. The wind blew it down, burned 17,000 hectares. And another tourist didn't want to take their toilet paper out of the park with them. And so they lit it on fire in this wind fire prone area. And it burned another 17,000 hectares, right? And so this is sort of the idea of responsible tourism. How do we get this information to tourists to make sure that this kind of stuff doesn't happen? And how do we ensure that, you know, they're aware of the risks that they're taking and going into a protected area, and what can they do to sort of improve conservation efforts in these types of areas. And so we've just these past 2 years, we've monitored the reforestation of more than 45,000 plants to try and improve reforestation efforts in the national park. And yeah, we partner really closely with CONAF, the National Park Authority, because we see the importance of this. But unfortunately, some of these forests will take hundreds, even thousands of years just to be reforested and back sort of at the level that they were prior to the forest fires, which obviously has detrimental effects to a lot of the different flora and fauna in the national park. And here, yeah, go ahead.
Get permits from local government to do all that work? Is that easy? And so, like literally a few seconds, so be quick on that one.
Yeah. So just to kind of close out, like on all of the projects that we do, our partnership with CONAF is really, really important. So since they're the National Park Authority, we basically have created a working agreement with them where the project is basically ideated by them. They say, hey, this is what the national park needs. We put our flavor and project plan into it, and then we're able to execute it without sort of having to go through the hurdles of constantly getting permits and things like that to carry out these projects.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wes, and appreciate this. And I'm looking forward to be back with you in Chile and in Torres de Paine, and just I would again say one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Even the part you mentioned that was burned by the tourists. I remember walking through it, and these beautiful trees, I know they burned, but they were so beautiful, and thinking, I don't think I've seen anything more beautiful before. So looking forward to be able to come back. And next I want to move to our friend Alistair. Alistair, we just talked about the importance of local travel. And I often talk about how I take travelers with me to places like, I don't know, Peru or Chile or wherever, and they want to meet with indigenous communities. And I'm talking about American travelers. And too often that we forget that we have our own indigenous community here in the United States. We want to go thousands of miles away and be like, oh, can we meet the indigenous communities there? And yet we have so many, of locals who we can go and visit, you yourself in New Mexico. And can you introduce us to the indigenous communities there, to your work? I know you come from journalism and nonprofit background. Can you tell us about yourself, your community, and maybe later we can talk about the opportunities for travel there?
Yeah, so Yate, I'm Alistair Bitsoy. I'm Dene on the Navajo Nation, which is geographically located in the Four Corners region of the United States, indigenous lands. As Aziz noted, I am a freelance writer, reporter, and also I am in the nonprofit industry right now with an indigenous-led land conservation organization. I was just looking at the presentation before, and all of that is happening in Argentina or in Patagonia is kind of what we would want to do in Bears Ears, and we're still far from that kind of planning and conservation efforts, in part because we are in litigation against the Trump administration for reducing pieces of ancestral land that is home to Dene people, Ute people, Zuni, Hopi, and Pueblo tribes in New Mexico, in Arizona, Utah, Colorado. So there's a lot of different hats that I wear. And I met Aziz through a mutual friend who works with our indigenous land conservation efforts in the United States. And as you mentioned, a lot of Americans love to travel overseas and they want to go into other areas that have indigenous communities, but sometimes they forget their backyard in America, where there's various indigenous peoples across America. But I just wanted to indicate that all of America is indigenous land. And I think that if you come to the Bears Ears region or Four Corners region, you can definitely experience many different cultures and languages. And yeah, so that's what I do now, Aziz, and I just wanted to open that conversation quickly. Do you have any other questions and how to proceed next?
I have many questions. Don't worry about that. Do you want to go next?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh. You want me to go ahead? All right. Well, Alistair, let's go through this idea of why travel would be important to the indigenous communities. And I'm using indigenous communities. People honestly don't know what to use. Indigenous communities, native communities. Why is it important for you, tourism? And second, can you just walk us slowly to one of the things we could learn? For example, as I started looking into creating these trips for Mejdi tours, I realized that when we talk about indigenous Native Americans, we talk about them as a monolithic group. There's one group, they all the same, wherever. Yeah, there are different tribes, but it's them. And I realized as I started learning from Devlin, who's our common friend, and from you and from others, there are so many variations and differences and cultures, even different within those tribes, that to me makes it even more fascinating. So if somebody says, oh yeah, I went to North Dakota and I visited with a community there, it doesn't mean they really understand your community in New Mexico, because not necessarily the same customs, the same traditions, the same community. So can you tell us about the importance of travel you think would be, because right now it's not really happening that much, or when it's not affecting.
Let me do a plug on that. So we are obviously in a global pandemic. Indigenous communities have been impacted the most per capita by COVID cases. So a lot of exposures in our communities. We are, compared to maybe not regular Americans, that we have small populations. So when the virus comes to our communities, it does impact, and sometimes we've lost lives, like of healers, of cultural knowledge holders, food experts, like elderly children. So we've been impacted a lot. The Navajo Nation, for instance, did have the highest per capita infection rate of COVID in the world, because it was earlier this summer. We did unfortunately have higher rates than New York City and New Jersey. And so now the curve is flattening. We are, on the Navajo Nation, we are gradually reopening. I think we are moderate orange risk, still moderate to high risk, but tourism is still closed off to non-Dene people, non-Navajo people. And so locals can go and travel, but we still are under the curfew hours. We're still wearing masks. We're still following CDC and Navajo Department of Health guidance, but tourism right now is still, at least on the Navajo Nation. I can't speak for the other tribes in the region, but I feel like they also have strict standards as well. And so during these COVID times, when I was brought to this conversation, I was like, no, we cannot travel. And I think that's kind of our frustration as Indigenous people, where others who travel have the privilege to travel, and they travel into our lands while bringing the virus to our communities. And so that's where that crux is like, okay, so we have the Kardashians and Jenners coming into our lands, and they're exercising their privilege. And then while they're exercising their privilege, meanwhile Indigenous peoples are locked up in their own homes. So that's an issue there. And so we're like, that's just like injustice, inequity, again, all over in America. And so, and probably the world. and so like those are things that we're navigating during this COVID time. Like how do we open tourism? But as far as I know, the recent public health order on the Navajo Nation this week closed off tourism still to non-travelers. But it's not to say that people are not traveling through our lands. They still are, but there's still publicly our tourism industry is still closed off.
Right.
And how do you think tourism can positively affect your community? I mean, maybe not now, but in the future, what is the way to, you're saying a lot of people drive by, how can they be more respectful when they're traveling in the area?
I think a lot of people, non-Americans, Americans need to understand that as Indigenous people, our governments are essentially sovereign nations. So whatever the rule or protocol or public health order is in place, respect those laws, do your research. If you're coming to the Four Corners region, note that you're not just going to like the Four Corners of America where the states meet, but also do your research and know that there's other Indigenous communities nearby. And so do your research and seeing what the travel advisories are for those locations. And I think that's the best next step post-COVID and COVID now. Like you need to obey our public health orders. And I think a lot of people forget that as Indigenous peoples, we have our own governments, we have our own laws, and that is equivalent or supersedes states in some cases, but also on the same level as American protocols. So I recommend for safe travel in the future to respect our laws and our boundaries and proceed in that order.
Well, Alistair, one of the issues you and I talked about, I was looking at some of the experiences people can have while traveling to meet in these communities, and some of those are very superficial. Mm-hmm. So when we started talking, we were talking about like, how can we build something that would have a real authentic partnership kind of experience? And can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think tourism here in Indigenous communities particularly are kind of stereotypical. Like sometimes they'll be like, I want to see a ceremony, or I want to go to a medicine healer, or I want to, and they start exploiting our cultures. And so that's something that's problematic in our communities, because we are all diverse in our voices and ceremonies and languages, but there's also that respect that tourists need to understand, like our lands are not for exploitation. And I think, and our knowledges are not for exploitation. And so I think when you ask that question, it's important to know that so you would need to go through local voices to get that authentic experience. And every experience will be different. Of course, we have beautiful lands. We have the iconic landscapes here on Navajo. You also have other areas that are not, maybe they're overlooked. And I'm glad Aziz reached out to me, because for a long time I've thought of starting a tourism company here on the Navajo Nation. There are already existing tourism industries and partners. So I would rely on, if you're going to come on Navajo or their tribal lands, I recommend tapping into local tourism industries, companies that exist, because I think they give the authentic voice to you to experience our lands, our cultures, our peoples. And so I recommend doing that. And there's various outlets that exist there. There's the Navajo Tourism Department, but there's also small businesses that create small packages that you can work with. And the slideshow I have with you is kind of a little bit of different work that I do, bridging COVID relief efforts, and then bringing water equity, water access to our communities, which that's another problem, our issue that we're trying to face during these COVID times. We've been trying to advocate for water rights and issues for a long time, but with the pandemic, it amplified a lot of these social, political economic issues that our communities are facing. There's also, I love to travel. So like I lived in New York, I've been overseas, and I've been wanting to go to Argentina, but also to the Middle East. And so those are places I would love to go one day. And yeah, hopefully I answered your question.
I have another question for you. If I was coming, I mean, I understand the Navajo Nation as an example is a sacred land. As you go through it, this is a sacred place for you. And if I was coming to you, not now, in 6 months, hopefully when the pandemic is over, what would be the first thing that meaningful to you you would want to show me? What would be something you would like, I really, you my friend, I'm gonna take you somewhere that's so important for you to see and understand, that I'm proud of, that this will show you our, you know, our land, our culture, our history?
I would say where I grew up, because a lot of people look at, like I said, a lot of tourists go to iconic places like Canyon de Chelly, Four Corners, Monument Valley, Chaco Canyon, Badlands, Bisty Badlands, the local trading posts that used to be operational and still are. And I like the Chiska Mountains, and that's where I'm from. This is Bears Ears in the background, but where I'm from, it's a mountain range that straddles like New Mexico and Arizona. And so that's where I'm from. And that's where I love to go. And I actually water haul from there for my plants in the garden that my family is growing. And so I always feel like those lands, that area is iconic to me, and I'm blessed to come from there. And I think it's like overlooked as a reason to visit the Navajo Nation, for instance. And that's one place I would like to take my family or anyone that's visiting, just because you see not only the mountains, but you also see the desert floor and just the summer sheep camps of our people who still migrate up and down the mountain for sustainability or agriculture, or their version of conservation. And so there's different summer and winter camps that our people historically used to move up and down the mountains, and still do to this day. So that's where I would take you, Aziz, if you were to come to the Navajo Nation.
I'm excited about this, and I have to say, one of the things that came out maybe good for us about COVID is we also ran trips many places, not as much in the United States, and this has brought us to start trips in the United States. So the reason I ended up meeting you, Alistair, is because we are starting, you know, hopefully next spring to run trips, and was one of the questions, to run trips in those areas and to go through these monuments and go through these important places that you mentioned, but not only seeing them through the eyes of a geologist, for example, but to see them through somebody who has a lot deeper connection to them. And you can obviously get the two narratives. Like, this is the cool thing about Mejdi. We do the multiple narratives. You can get obviously the geology and the rock formation and all of that, but you can also get the sacredness of this place and to see it through the eyes of the people who live there and connect and be beneficial to them. I think somebody asked about souvenir shops, and like, yeah, souvenir shops are cool, but there's a lot more ways to spend your money to benefit the locals who live there. And that's going to be the goal of how these trips should, and I think will, run.
Yeah, and I think that's a good question, because I think about it, like there's a lot of existing networks that exist in our communities, and they may not be on the highway or like souvenir shops, but there's beyond that. Like there's this, like you have to go into the land, you have to build a relationship with us as people to get a broader experience. I've had friends visit me from like the Bay Area in California, and they've been mesmerized and say that the landscape here looks like Mars. And it does probably to them, but that's where I grew up, and I never think of it as Mars. But I guess to an outsider, it does look that way. But like, I think if you build relationship with people, then you can go beyond the souvenir workshops or that you see on the side of a highway. Like right now, where we have a bunch of farms, a lot of our people, because of the pandemic, started to tap into their cultural knowledge of farming again. And due to colonization and due to the influence of the American lifestyle, a lot of our people kind of gravitated away from our cultures to big box stores like Walmart and to get their food. But I see in some ways the pandemic being a blessing because it's rooting us back into to the environment, to the earth, to reconnect to the lands, and hike and bike and not just do outdoor recreational but activities, but also plant your own gardens, replant your own gardens. And so I think there's a renaissance now. Like, you can't always depend on the outside market, American market. You have to go deep within as the Ne people or Ute people or Zuni or Pueblo peoples, and look into our cultures, look into what created us to be uniquely who we are, and our attachments to the land, and why we value the land the way we do. And so I think those things are happening in our communities again, which is very exciting.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about doing research before traveling. I think that's also something that we encourage our travelers to do. Come prepared. Come, I don't know if only it's all about information, but also emotionally prepared to open your mind to meet new people. And I also like that our show today started with Jared saying that people are wanting to connect with nature, and that's why they should come to these resorts. And we're ending it on the same note of wanting to connect to nature in a different way, which is awesome about, Aziz was talking about different narratives and different perspectives, and that's exactly what travel is all about.
Right.
Yeah. And even on our lands, there's various multitude of narratives from across the indigenous cultures. We call one thing in different languages, and I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and that's, to me, that, like I told you, to me, that was one of the main learning when we started talking, is learning how the different communities are different. And we can't just look at you and a person in Florida and a person, because they all indigenous, and a person in the Dakotas to be exactly the same. And even within the Arizona and Utah and these places, you have different tribes who have
there's regional differences too among us as well.
Right. So that's, to me, is fascinating, and it makes it more interesting, makes it more exciting to be able to connect and learn. And the way we envisioning our trips together is that we would visit all these different, or not all, as many as we allow to, able to, of these different tribes, and learn about the differences, learn about each community, spend time with each community, meet the people. And then somebody asked about the holy sacred places, be able to visit these sacred places with the people who can tell us why they're sacred, why they're interesting, how do we be respectful as we're traveling through it. I think that's the least we would expect from a responsible traveler, is to be respectful. Yeah.
And then another tip is, like, we're not going to stage ceremonies for you. We're listen to our media and cultural sensitivity efforts. Like, we're not going to make sure you have clearance before taking photos. Like, make sure you get consensus before you do anything. And I think that's what the American, I feel like, privilege is. It's like, oh, it's there, it's mine. So it's kind of like eliminating firsting things, eliminating discovery, eliminating capitalism, or like this value of patriarchy. So all those things are, I think those are conversations happening in our communities now. And I think there's media protocol, cultural protocol that outsiders also need to consider as well.
Well, thank you so much, Alistair. It's definitely important to hear your views on that. And Jared and Wes, again, thank you for joining us. This was just an amazing dive into so many different topics within 1 hour. And we look forward to continue these conversation. We see Jared here, and some Wes is joining as well. But yeah, thank you so much, and we look forward to next week, and we'll meet again next week at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, Thursday, and we are hoping to be able to discuss Lebanon next week, and mainly to focus on the recent explosion in Lebanon and the aid work. That's something we haven't really talked about much, but in the last couple of weeks, we have been doing our best to get some help to our Lebanese friends, and we're able with partner organizations to do so. And so we'll be able to talk about that a little bit, and I'll be able to show you probably some of the work that's being done by our partners in Lebanon, especially Volunteers Without Borders, who we'll talk about a bit more next week. But thank you all for joining us. Kim, anything I forgot to say?
Just that it's not where you travel, it's how.
Perfect.